Today we're talking to Sunday Dech. After migrating to Australia at the age of 6, Sunday took up basketball at the age of 17 and has spent over the past decade playing at the highest level. Today we learn a bit from Sunday about what high performance looks like in that context, some of the key attributes, traits, and how that can be applied in a professional setting. Sunday, having played at the highest level for a significant period of time, what personal attributes do you think help people excel, and how do you see this playing out in day-to-day life?
Good question. I think there's definitely a lot of factors that are involved. I think it's a melting pot of things to kind of help people excel. I think the biggest one is probably just adaptability. Especially in sports, you're going to be put in a lot of situations which you're comfortable with, some you're not. And yeah, you just have to be malleable and adaptable, and then being able to quickly change directions, right? You may have a game plan going in, or a specific idea of what your role is going to be in a team, but then you get there and this is what the team needs and you quickly have to adjust. Otherwise, you're caught on the bench, or you don't win games and the season goes downhill. So adaptability is one. And I think just effective communication, right? I think that goes a long way. Obviously, in the game of basketball, it's so fast, and you have to be able to be clear and concise in your communication at that point to get the message across. And sometimes the delivery may not be the best, but you have to take the message from it, adjust accordingly, and then come back over in the reflection phase, which for us is watching the video back, or, reflecting on the game and how it went and how we can do better next time. So they're definitely two. And then I think the third one is, just your personal relationships with your teammates, because effectively within the season, you spend so much time with each other, right? You're in each other's hair nonstop, and, being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes and seeing things from their point of view, whether that's a coach, whether that's a teammate, a support staff. Because you're in an environment where you're working with different characters and different personalities, and understanding each one goes a long way, right, to getting the end goal. Everyone's end goal is different, whether that's winning a championship, or that's pushing the team organization forward. Say, you finished the bottom of the ladder last year. This year you want to kind of go mid-pack, or you lost a championship game last year. This year you want to win, right? And it's the one percenters, and it's how you deal with people and how you navigate that's going to kind of help you achieve your goal.
Often in sport, the difference between success or not is in its margins. It may be a few points, or even maybe a few seconds. What practices do you implement from a physical and mental perspective to ensure you get the most out of yourself?
Yeah, look, I think the physicals are non-negotiable. We have to weight train, we have to put strategies in place, and we have to train, 5-6 days a week to kind of get that part of the game ticked off. But it's the mental side, I think, that separates teams, because the margins, as you said, are small. And, I think it's the ability to be able to quickly move on to the next play, or quickly move on to the next possession. That's the difference, right? Because I'll give you a scenario, your offensive transition, the other team's coming at you, right? And, they shoot a shot and you get the ball. It's quickly making that next decision to go and attack them and score. I think that's the difference between a win and a loss, right? And when we lose a close game, the saying in basketball, it's not actually that last possession that lost you the game. It's the other 10 to 15 that led to that possession that lost you the game. So when it does get to that, right, the small margin happens with, once again, the effective communication, but then also the prep work you do day in and day out. For us, it starts in preseason, where you do team bonding activities, being around each other. That goes a long way again, because if you don't know your teammates and you don't know your coaches, then you kind of can't connect to them. And for example, we had a game on Sunday where we had a great win, one of our teammates' birthdays, and we went to the beach the next day, because we had the day off, and 10 of our guys showed up. That's a team that's connected. That's a team that care about each other. And I think it shows in your wins and losses at the end of the season. So it's very rare that you have a team that's very successful, and wins the close games and wins championships, that you're not all on the same page, or or heading in the right direction. So it's very important, right? And to be able to win those close ones, you have to be connected both on and off the court.
As a professional athlete, you're obviously used to giving and receiving feedback. How do you filter that feedback, given that it's received at such a quick rate, to make sure it's useful? And how do you, when you're giving it, also tailor it to make sure that it's effective for the people that are receiving that?
Yeah, look, feedback's very important. It's very critical to kind of your progression as an individual and as a team. Because I think obviously the team has great goals and goals to win a championship, win a lot of games and stuff of that nature. But then individually, you also need to have goals throughout the season that make sure you're ticking those milestones. And sometimes they become sticking points, right? When your individual goals and the team goals don't, correlate. And so that feedback can be pretty abrupt, or if they are going in the same direction, right? It's making sure that your ego doesn't get so inflated that, you forget to do the things that got you there. So I think getting feedback is so crucial. And the way you talk to people is very important, right? And I think that the human aspect comes first, where you got to understand who you're talking to. You got to understand people have feelings and emotions, and sometimes, your tone of voice and the message you're saying is very important, and how it's received as well is equally as important. So for us on a team, right, at the start of the year, you start off with a roadmap, and you go, hey, we want to get A to B. How do we get there? And that's the little goalposts you put along the way, and they're little markers that you have to tick off. So every 2 weeks, we catch up with our coaches. We've got a staff of 5 coaches. Each coach, manages 2 or 3 players, and they're your direct line between them and the head coach, right? And sometimes you go directly to the head coach, and you kind of get goalposts along the way. And if you're doing your job, everything's pretty cruisy. And sometimes if you're not, and you're not, meeting expectation, then that's where the feedback gets sticky and it becomes a conversation. I know the coaches I've worked best with have, come to you and they've established a conversation first. It's like, hey, maybe I want to get this point across to Sunday, but I'm not directly going to attack him because he's going to take it personally, right? Or stuff of that nature. So maybe I'm going to pose a question, it becomes a conversation, then I get to my point at the end of it. So that's one way that I know has worked for me personally. Other times I want what it is, the cold hard truth. I'm on the court. I don't have time to kind of go through a whole monologue with you. It's like, hey, what do you need to do? Maybe it's a 1-2 word answer, and sometimes you need to take the message and not how it's said in that regard. So feedback's really important. Another one too is obviously I alluded to earlier. If you know the people you're working with, it goes a long way to understanding their makeup and understand how they receive feedback. Some of our guys just need to watch the film, and you don't even need to talk about it because they know what they've done or they know what need to do next time. Some people, they need a conversation. Other people, you need to demonstrate it. So I think it's your modes of learning, right? I don't know what it's called. It's like the visual, the physically doing it, or just the understanding it mentally. Everyone's different, but if you do understand someone to that capacity, it goes a long way to kind of understanding that feedback and then acting on it as well. Because a lot of the times feedback can be given, but then it's not implemented, right? And so what was the point of it? It's that putting the steps in place after the feedback's given that goes a long way to helping a team win.
So the NBL requires very quick turnarounds for games. So you might have a great or a bad performance on a Friday night and then be required to play again on a weekend. How do you stay level and how do you maintain your mental state through the ups and the downs? And do you have any tips for anyone in the workplace?
Yeah, good question. I think it's the age-old saying, right? Stay even keel. Very relevant, because when you win a game, you're such a high, or you have such a great performance and you win, you're just on cloud 9, or you have a terrible game and you feel like you're in the gutter, right? Trying to find the happy medium, I think starts in your process and having your end goal and vision in mind at all times. So obviously our goal is to win a championship as a team, but then individually you have goals as well, right? And aspirations where you want to take the next step in your career, or you want to take the next leap in the team. You might be a bench player wanting to be a starter. You might be wanting to be a starting player wanting to make the national team. So that's the stuff that have to coincide, and they kind of have to go on the same trajectory. So I think when you play a game, you can feel really good and feel great about it if you do win and you do make the right step in the right direction. But to stay even keel is like you always watch the film, right? And and you watch the film, it doesn't lie. It always picks up stuff you can do better, and kind of just having a growth mindset enables you to do so. But if you do have a bad game and you watch a film, it's not as bad. So I think nothing is as good as you think or as bad as you ever think. And then when you watch a film and you turn around to the next opponent, then they're the stuff you work on. Like we talked about implementation earlier, right? It's, hey, I may have missed all my shots tonight, right? But how did I miss it? You know, you can think about it, right? And not understand the process that went into it. But then when you watch a film, it's like, hey, maybe my elbow's not under the ball, or maybe I'm rushing my shot. And you can see that when you watch the film back. And then for the next game, you can kind of change your focus and steer it in that direction. In the office, I'm not too sure, or the workplace. I've never really been in that environment, but I can probably imagine that, say there's a big contract you're working on, you execute it, you've done fantastically at it, and now your ego's through the roof, and you kind of have to come back to earth, because the same process and the work you put in that first situation, you got to put into the next one, and it's just rinse and repeat. So how you attack that daily becomes a big indicator of how you go forward, right? And I think for me personally, what helps me is meditation, just kind of quietening the mind and being still, because everything moves so fast in basketball, and you kind of need to contrast that as well to find the equal medium. And then another one for me is just hanging out with my teammates, because you go through so much together, and you go through the fire together, that you have to enjoy the good times together as well. So having beach days, going out together, getting lunch, getting dinner, that stuff's important too, because it enables you to kind of have that connection, just beyond the game. So when you do get to the court, stuff's easy.
What traits have you seen in the best leaders you've worked with Sunday? Like, how do they portray themselves? And in particular, how do they work during duress and difficult times?
Good question. In my time, I've come across such a lot of great leaders, and everyone's kind of got their own quirks and little nuances. Some of the best ones that I've seen, people who walk the walk, so they don't just talk about it, but they do it through action and through the work, the body of work they do. And that's doing the little things, and I think I got given a book a long time ago. It was Legacy by the All Blacks, like documenting the All Blacks. And it talked about the sweeping the sheds, and that's something that stuck with me. Because throughout my journey, the greatest leaders are the ones that are doing all the little things, behind the scenes. They're not just leading from the front, but they're also pushing from behind, right? And that's something that I think is very important. Another mantra that, we had on our Olympic team was serve leadership. So the best leaders are in service of others. They're not necessarily pointing the finger and telling everyone and delegating. That there is a part of that, but then also if you see the manager with bags at the airport, you help him with the bags. And you could be the captain, you could be the most decorated player, but you just do it because it's who you are, and because it's your nature. Some of the best leaders I've also been around have been effective communicators. So just their demeanor brings such a calm presence amongst the group that you feel like you trust him without really knowing him. And, off the bat, and then as the season goes on, you get to know them and you understand who they are. And but it's just that I can't describe it, right? It's like when you're a little kid, right? And you get home and it's a tough day and mum gives you a hug, right? It's that feeling, like you just feel safe. And I think that's a trait that great leaders do have. They have that on their staff members, on their team members and stuff like that. And then lastly, right, I think great leaders are people who aren't afraid to rip the Band-Aid off. They're able to have the tough conversations, regardless of the ramifications. They're dealing with the situation at present. So being present, ripping that Band-Aid off and stating the facts for as they are is a hallmark of a great leader, right? Because they're willing to take that step forward into the, maybe uncomfortable waters to get the result they want, right? And then in doing so, they also nurture and guide that conversation into a place where it's like, all right, this is a situation. Now, how do we fix it? Let me help you, and it's not so much, like I said, pointing the finger. It's like, you need to do this better. It's like, how can we do this better to get to the next step? So I guess in essence, that's serving leadership, right? You're able to address the situation, but also you're able to guide the person to the next position they need to get to.
So while you would think that goals are very clear in sport, obviously there might be some individuals within the team that have their own personal goals, and these may impact you or the team negatively or positively. Can you please describe how some of the best leaders you've seen make sure the team can get on the same page?
Yeah, no, really, really good question. I think that's so apparent in sport all the time, right? Because you need a mix of ambitious people in your group to kind of keep that competitiveness and that drive at a high, but also you don't want them too ambitious that they're taken away from the team. And I think some of the great leaders I've seen navigate those waters, they do it in a way which they state the obvious pretty early on and pretty quickly. It's like, for example, a coach might go, hey, X, I know you want to get here, but the team wants to get here. How do we get the two to kind of move in the right direction? Sometimes that doesn't work, and that's okay. You have to be willing to cut your ties early, right? Or adapt in a way that enables both to succeed, And I think a lot of that always comes down to compromise, what's the player willing to compromise for the greater good of the team, but also what's the coach or the leader or the organization willing to invest into that player for the season, so then they meet in the middle, right? And find a common ground. So, once again, communicating that early on is definitely important, because, once you've let the Mustang out the gates, it's hard to rein them back in, right? And then also, for example, if you do allow an individual to kind of go on their own little journey and try and achieve their goals, and you win, so it's correlation, not causation, it becomes a sticking point, because now, you're getting the results you want, but maybe not the process that you're wanting to get there, and it could become at the expense of the group. So that's something you got to be cognizant of. Establishing early communication, and that is really key. But then also as a player, you have to also remember you're there for the season, but how you leave that place is very important and integral to your next situation. So, okay, you might be on your own journey and, you might be hot property right now, but when you get to your next team and they call your coach or they call the organization, you could be a great player, but if you're a bad teammate, not many teams are going to want you, or the teams that do want you probably aren't the best ones for you at that time. So that's something you got to be cognizant of too, right? And I can imagine in your line of work and workplace, right, you might have a stunning employee who's great and doing their job, but they're not aligning with the group. In my eyes, I think you need to move on from that person pretty quickly, because one, they can infect the whole group and other key members. And secondly, too, you might be putting all your investment into them and they leave at the end of the year anyways. So now you're stuck on ground zero again. So the most effective leaders kind of point that out right away, try and get the person on board into the objective of the team. Because if you do let it run away, if you do let it go on for too long, then it's too hard to rein it back in.
Sunday, you played for 3 NBL franchises. What do you think separates organisations that are working effectively versus those that may be suboptimal at that time?
Yeah, I think what makes organisations very effective is, one, their culture, the environment they provide for their employees, their players, their staff is very key. Obviously the NBL, there's so much turnover every year in terms of players, but the structure that's in place and the types of people you get in is key and integral to your continued success. Obviously, I played in Perth in my younger years, and we did a lot of winning, and I thought it was just, you play basketball, you win games, you play finals, you win championships. It's all easy, right? And then you leave and you experience different organizations. I went to Illawarra, who was rebuilding at that stage. Then I came to Adelaide, who was rebuilding as well. And there's definitely nuances and differences in each organization, right? But a correlation across the league, the most successful teams have had a core group of players and a core group of staff who've been together for quite a while. And you get the odd team who comes in there and they kind of surprise everyone, but they don't really work with the numbers. And so I think the culture is definitely a big piece. The types of people you bring in terms of upper management, middle management, and then the playing staff and the coaching staff is key, because they're kind of going to shape your future, right? And we're definitely a results-based industry. Wins and losses dictate a lot, but how much you weigh into that is on you as an organization, right? You may hire a coach and their first year you might finish bottom 2. Are you willing to invest in that coach and give him another couple of years to kind of get his feet wet and, kind of understand the league and then develop a system that's going to be long-standing? Or do you kind of chop and change and re-navigate and reinvent, every single year? So they're the couple things. But I think culture is definitely a big piece. And then also the people you bring in. You might get some great talent, but once again, like we talked about in the previous question, if your organizational goals and team goals don't align, you're generally not going to have a lot of success. And then that kind of drives turnover year after year. And then at some point, right, you're going to have to look yourself in the mirror and be like, okay, what's our actual goal here? Are we here to, get a quick fix and get a quick high, or are we here for the long haul and trying to build a dynasty and something that's going to last long after we're gone?
So Sunday, having been in the Olympics, what did you learn from the very best in the world, and what separates them from others?
Man, it was first of all, it was an unbelievable experience. Just going there and kind of being amongst your idols, people that I grew up watching on TV, was something really, really cool. And then also being in the most competitive environment in the world, right? That's where the elite of the elite are. And there was definitely some things that I took away from the Olympics. A couple things that really stood out to me was, one, their attention to detail. Every athlete, no matter where you looked, had dotted their I's and crossed their T's. So they're very detail focused, because right, the difference is in the smallest of margins, and so just seeing, obviously in the basketball segment, we were in Lille and all the basketball athletes were there, right? And seeing players train, lift, eat, and just the way they went about their business, it was no nonsense. They got to the point and, they were in there getting it done. Very detail oriented. Secondly, probably the biggest takeaway from the Olympics was how much of a ceiling I thought I had left, and you get there and you see, the likes of LeBron, Jokic, Steph Curry, these guys train and play, and you're just like, wow, like I've got more to give, right? Whereas here in Australia, in the NBL, I thought I probably was working at 95% to 100% of my max. But then you get to the Olympics and you see these guys are working at this rate, and kind of making up that difference was where I'm like, hey, like my ceiling's actually lifting here. I've probably got another 20% more to give, and that's in the little 1%ers. That's in my recovery. That's in my diet. That's in my training habits. Being efficient, rather than spending hours on end in the gym, was definitely the key. So yeah, coming away, I think I definitely realized I probably had a lot more to give than I thought I was giving. I thought I was giving it my all, which wasn't really as, as competitive or as high as some of the other athletes there. And then also, once again, the attention to detail was just second to none. Everything was efficient. Everything had a time on it. Everything had a reason. You don't just do stuff for no reason, because you have to be so effective and efficient out there.
Playing professional sport obviously brings a lot of pressure in your day-to-day life and in delivery. So what sort of tips and tricks do you use personally to help manage that pressure? And is there any you'd pass on to others?
Man, really, really good question. I think there's a couple ways I'm going to answer this. So as a basketballer, right, you go through a journey. You got your early part of your career, your middle part, and then your later part, right? I'm in that middle part right now. So early on in my career, it was tunnel vision. Everything's basketball. You couldn't tell me otherwise. My partner, Charlotte, couldn't tell me anything. And I think it probably came at the expense of your relationships a little bit, because, you're trying to make it, you're trying to prove yourself, you're trying to make that next step. And yeah, like everything kind of does take a back seat to it. And when you look back, right, you go, was that the right thing to do? Well, you never know, right? Because that's what felt you had to do at the right time with the information you had. In the middle part of the career, I guess that's when your body, so your skills, and then also your maturity kind of come to a head, right? And you kind of understand things and being like, hey, I've got to see the forest from the trees a bit, So basketball is my passion, but it may not be everything, So that's where you kind of take interest in other things, and you realize that your life as a whole is a circle, and to kind of bring that circle to bring it full circle, you need to be happy off the court as you are on the court, and the wins and losses don't hurt as much because you've got other things to bring you back to the fold. And I guess the things I've found is, family is really important. So making sure that my relationship with my parents, my friends, my siblings is at a high, because they're the ones that are there from the beginning of your journey, and then they're going to be there at the end. And if you kind of don't give them the time of day in the middle, then it's like, well, when you are down and when you finish, you kind of don't have that bond on that relationship. So yeah, I definitely try and make an effort to spend a lot of time with Charlotte outside of the game, and navigate my day around when she's home from work, or say if it's an off day, I'll wake up early, go do my training, and then we have activities to do. So doing activities just gets your mind off it a little bit. And then when you do come back, you're fresh and you're ready to go. And then I'm not there yet, but I guess on the later part of your career, the basketball's maybe not as important. You still love it and you still enjoy it, but then you reminisce about all the times and all the things you could have done. And that's through talking to my old teammates, people who have retired, and understanding that, like they probably wish they enjoyed things a bit more rather than being so hard on themselves and kind of just enjoying the journey. So yeah, some of the things I do now to help me is, one, playing other sports. So Charlotte likes tennis. We'll just go to the tennis court and we'll hit the tennis ball in the on an afternoon when it's an off day. Go to the beach a lot, hang out with my friends, teammates and their partners as well. So obviously we go through a journey, but our partners do as well. And they get the wrath of when we're angry, or, the highs of when we're really happy, and kind of understanding that they need a connectiveness and they need a group as well, and which is the other partners during the season, because they can relate and stuff of that nature. I try to talk to my family every day, whether it's one of my siblings or one of my parents, and we try to get them out to Adelaide once or twice a year in the season, so we can just hang out and enjoy the downtimes. For me, especially this year, I got hurt and was out for a bit of time, and I had my siblings over, so that was awesome. Generally in the season, you're flying here, there, and everywhere, so you don't get the amount of time with them as you would like. And so just having that time in season to spend with them was pretty crucial and really good for my mental health. And then, lastly, just on that point is the mental side of things, right? Because you can put so much pressure on yourself as an athlete and to perform and stuff of that nature. And then I know a lot of athletes who have gone through anxiety, bouts of depression because of the sport and just the pressure they put on themselves or they feel. And so, taking care of your mental is definitely something that's very paramount. There's an abundance of, sports psychologists available these days at our fingertips and at our disposal. And, I encourage a lot of teammates to talk to someone in their family, someone out of it, but someone who you can trust, that you can feel that you can vent to without being judged or, stuff of that nature. So they're definitely things that are very important. And some of the things I do for my mental health is I journal. Mm-hmm. So writing about the good times, the bad times, and the okay times, because then you look back and you remember, what you did to kind of get through that tough situation, or what you went through when stuff were great, and the things that you're doing, the things you were ticking off. And also I like to read. So reading just helps quiet my mind and kind of navigate, waters when the game's so much and, you've watched your film and you sit there and you go, what I do, like I get a bit antsy sometimes. So when I pick up a book, I just feel really at ease and stuff like that as well.
So Sunday, what lessons have you found from elite sport that you believe will help you post your basketball career?
Oh, good question. There's a lot, right? And I think it's you learn so much throughout your career, and you kind of have to take the ones that work for you because everyone's different. Some of the things that I found that I think are going to translate is just handling adversity. Because as an athlete, right, you have to navigate new team members every single year, new coaches, sometimes new organizations. You have to navigate the unknown of not having a consistent job, and you could get fired at any given moment. So they're things that's always in the back of your mind. And while you're going, right, you knock on wood, but everyone's one injury away from having a career that's over. So it's stuff you kind of have to think about, but not dwell on. So maybe I think that'll help me a lot in kind of the business, or I don't know, anything I do after the game. Other things is probably just being able to communicate and get along and understand certain personalities, different environments and different people. Because, in an office, everyone's comes from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different environments. And so, being able to being adaptable, like we talked about at the beginning, is definitely going to be key in that regard. And then I think maybe one of the last things that I think, I will take away from the game of basketball is like probably the leadership side of things. Being in a team, right? Everyone's a leader in their own right, whether you acknowledge it or not. You're either an example of what to do or what not to do. And, I definitely try to be the former more so than not. And that comes in by just showing up and doing your job every day. Even, the years I've had where we've won 5 games and years I've had where we've won 25, and the difference between the two, nothing changes in your makeup, right? Because you still got to show up, do your job, do the best you can, and always try to exceed that, right? Because that's how you get better, and our sport's very black and white because there's wins and losses. And I think being able to take that forward into whatever I do next, right? Whether, you're in a shit situation or you're in a great situation, being consistent in who you are and being diligent will go a long way, right? Because then your boss recognizes your work, or your co-workers recognize the work you put in and day out, and they're gonna be like, hey, I want to be around this person. And that's a surefire way to kind of be one of the group and not be, isolated or ostracized. So yeah, they're definitely the 3 that I think I'll take away. And then there's a bunch, right? And you just see so many people and the work they put in and day out, everyone's so different. But yeah, I think they're definitely the 3 that I'll take away from myself personally.
It was great to have the opportunity to talk to Sunday today. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about what we do, please visit our website, elevatemc.com.au.